we sent Andrew DiCecco to check out the Philadelphia Eagles, and of course, they have hired their new offensive coordinator. Not a surprise, Andrew. Kevin Petula is the new offensive coordinator here, and obviously he has been around. Give us your thoughts on them basically hiring from within. They did this a couple of years ago. It did not go well for Brian Johnson. He lasted 1 year. He was out. Why should we think this will be different?
Well, Kevin Petula has been with the Eagles for a number of years now. He's been with Nick Sirianni for a number of years now, so he's obviously very well versed in how things are supposed to run, what Nick is looking to accomplish offensively, and this is not a coordinator who is ill prepared for the moment. I think that everything that he's been working towards has been for this moment, and I understand the trepidation from pockets of the fan base because of the Brian Johnson situation, but they didn't rush him into this role. He's been sort of building throughout the years. Yes, his name hasn't come up a ton in these coaching searches, but I believe that because he knows Nick so well, because he has the continuity of working with JalenHurts in the passing game, that suggests to me that there should be, I'm not going to say it's going to be a seamless transition, but I don't think there's going to be as much of a hitch as some may think.
You look at Kevin Petula, he was the pass game coordinator. He's also the associate head coach, but his background, wide receivers coach, pass game. Do we think that this will mean a evolution to more passing in 2025?
I don't think so. Even with him presiding over the passing game, it still wasn't exactly the explosive aerial attack that we were expecting. I think you're still going to see them lean on the running game with Saquon Barkley and that offensive line and really implement sort of probably like a hybrid West Coast offense. I don't think you're going to see a drastic departure from what the Eagles have done, but probably more of a rhythmic, timing-based offense. They're always going to prioritize explosive plays. But when you have players like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and knowing that he's worked with them as closely as he has over the number of years, you're going to be inclined to try and get them involved and maybe open things up in the passing game a little bit more. But I really don't think the Eagles are going to deviate from what's made them so successful this season, which has been the running game, mixed, obviously intertwined with some passing game as well.
We're talking with Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4. You know, a lot of people who listen to Football at 4, they value your opinion, Adams and Jeff's. Were you a proponent of in-house Kevin Petula, or do you think they should have gone outside and got a different voice and maybe some new ideas with this offense? Did they leave too much meat on the bone and that they should have brought somebody else in?
Well, I certainly think in a move of this magnitude, it warrants bringing in other candidates to get a feel for what they're looking to get accomplished, where their mindset is, and how their vision, if their vision aligns with what the Eagles' philosophical approach has been. And I think to not necessarily do that, I mean, there's a couple of coaches that I think would have been worthy of another interview. Gerard Johnson, the quarterback's coach from the Houston Texans, is a coach who interviewed in the past for an Eagles vacancy at the offensive coordinator position. Nate Shieldhouse is a passing game coordinator for the Rams. And I don't think that, I mean, he obviously, they had some interest in him at some point in previous hiring cycles, but I just thought it was curious not to go that route and to kind of go with the in-house option. Obviously, when you're this late in the process, it makes it a little bit easier of a transition to go with the in-house option. And they've been grooming him for this opportunity. He hasn't solely been the pass game coordinator. He's worn a multitude of hats. He's helped Nick Sirianni in game preparation and scheduling. So and much more than that. So I think that he has taken on more of a responsibility in past years to get him ready for this role.
All right, Andrew, obviously they have the offensive coordinator in. Now let's see who they have to work with. Really no changes are set other than potentially right guard here. KennyGainwell is also a free agent. So when you look at this offense next year, I wouldn't anticipate a lot of changes. However, if they lose Mekhi Becton and if they lose KennyGainwell, are they equipped in-house to handle those losses if they in fact happen?
Well, let's start with Mekhi Becton. And this is a player, Becton he had a good season. I think to a degree, maybe it's a little bit overvalued considering that he was playing around so many other dominant players. But I thought he transitioned to guard really well. But there were times in the postseason, I could think of the Packers game. I could think of times in the Super Bowl where maybe he didn't have the best showing as an individual, but the line as a collective did a really nice job. But there were times where Tyler Steen, as this year he was a second-year player, was kind of thrust into the lineup, whether it be left or right guard. In many cases, it was right guard in the absence of Becton. And I thought Tyler Steen did a nice job. He's also a player who's still on a rookie deal, and that might be pretty appealing. If the drop-off isn't that drastic, I think it would make a lot of sense for a team that's trying to allocate resources and be really diligent in how they do so. If you have a player that you draft in the third round like Tyler Steen, you feel comfortable with him moving forward, I think that would make a lot of sense because I think he did some good things. Now, running back, yeah, KennyGainwell, I believe that he's the most underrated player on the Eagles offense, but they're equipped to handle that loss if that's the way that they go, because Will Shipley, who they drafted in the fourth round last year, everything that he's been working towards, he prepares as if he's a starter. He has some juice to his game, and I just think that he's continuously grown as a player and developed throughout the season. So I think the plan was probably always in place for Will to take the reins as the running back too.
Yeah, obviously, I agree with your point on Steen. He would go into games. It seemingly almost every week he was in for somebody. You know, somebody got hurt for a series here or there. And the good part about that was you never knew Steen was in the game. I mean, that tells you that he did a really good job. Of the Eagles ready to hand the keys over to Steen, who, by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, he was slated to be the starting right guard, and Becton was just so they were so enamored with his size that he kind of took that job over when Steen got hurt back in training camp.
Yeah, he was. That's a good memory. He was actually slated to start. He had, I believe, it was an ankle injury in camp. Mekhi Becton, that's all that he needed to really take over. You just see the size and the athleticism, and I think the Eagles became enamored with that. And Mekhi, to his credit, took advantage of the opportunity. But for some reason, Mike, Tyler Steen doesn't get the proper recognition, widespread. It seems like everyone's clamoring for the Eagles, at least on the outside, for Mekhi Becton to be re-signed. But I thought that Tyler Steen, and there has been moments, you can look at some of the penalties that haven't been great that he committed this year, but there has been moments where I thought that he looked better at right guard than Mekhi Becton. I don't think that's hyperbole, but I think he's equipped to do it. For some reason, he sort of gets a little bit dismissed by the outside, but he did a nice job when pressed into service.
I'm talking to Andrew DiCecco, Football 4 here on the Sports Bash. And when we look at the offensive line, I think we just look at Steen, but are there any other young prospects that you like that might be in competition if they let Becton walk?
Well, Trevor Keegan's there. He's there. He would be a second-year player out of Michigan. He's more of a left guard. He can play even center in a pinch, but he's not on the level of Tyler Steen right now. He's still more of a developmental project. And he was inactive for all but one game this year, so it gave him a different perspective. And you wonder how players like that come back after a year of working with Jeff Stoutland, so you never want to discredit that. But I really do think that Tyler Steen's done enough. He kept having to get plugged in to put enough good things on tape that maybe if you're the Eagles, you're giving that some consideration as you look at the money and where you want to dedicate it to. I mean, I think that if you have a young offensive lineman there that you can plug in, it might make some sense to lean on that.
You take a look at wide receiver real quick. Let's go because you have Brown and Smith there, but Dotson they traded for. I know Anais Smith, didn't do much this year, but are there guys that you think could take a jump, a step in that position that maybe can add more to the pass game if they, in fact, do choose to throw the ball more?
Yeah, I think Johnny Wilson is a player that I'm not expecting him to take this seismic leap as a player, but become more of a factor more beyond the blocking element because he does do that really well, and the Eagles like that. I think he can be a competent red zone presence the more comfortable that he gets within the offense. JalenHurts has a ton of confidence in Johnny Wilson. And Anais Smith, I've gotten to know him a little bit this season, talking to him, overcame injuries, overcame a really bad training camp enough to make the team. Well, he was on injured reserve, but and then he was then eventually activated, and he scored his first touchdown late in the season when the Eagles played a lot of their reserves. But that's a player that I think he just needed time. Not everybody progresses at the same rate. He was kind of thrown into the deep end and not necessarily be able to handle that. And I think going through practice, going through meetings, seeing how veterans conduct themselves, all those things start to add up, and you're able to build on that experience and those and the advice that you're given. And he started to get more confident. And I really do believe that once he got more confident, he was playing faster and seeing things faster. And as a result, you saw that later in the season when he did have to play in that one game, he looked like he could. He looked like he belonged out there. So he's another player that we talk about. Maybe Britton Covey doesn't come back. Cooper DeJean more than likely won't be your punt returner next year. Well, Anais Smith has that in his on his resume that he can do that. So I think he's going to get a long look.
All right, that's a little look at the offense and what's over there on that side of the ball, what could be coming up if they lose a guy like Becton or Gainwell. On the defense, they have more guys. Let's start with Milton Williams. If he were to walk, and there's good indications that he's going to get a lot of money, that's a spot where they do have some younger guys behind him. So let's talk a little bit about who could step up if Milton Williams walked.
Moro Ojomo would be the player that I think is going to take the biggest leap forward. But from a defensive line standpoint, I just think that you look at, he was playing more snaps than Jordan Davis late in the season, but it was beyond that. It might not show up on the stat sheet, but he's effective at collapsing the pocket, really advanced hand usage compared to his rookie season, good burst, and I think he showed some pretty good power at the point of attack for being an undersized player. He's ready for an elevated role, but he's probably best suited to be a third tackle. And I thought Thomas Booker, though he played very sporadically during the season, he was active for every game, and I thought that he maximized his opportunities. Vic Fangio has been a Thomas Booker fan, and he's probably, he's going to bump up the depth chart or at least have the opportunity to do so, and I would expect the Eagles to look to the draft to add to that room, because really beyond Jalen Carter, then you're now asking Jordan Davis to take on a larger role, and I'm not so sure that that's really in the cards for him. And then Moro Ojomo, he really hasn't been asked to do it. He's an undersized player, so you worry about the potential of wearing down and minimizing his effectiveness if he has to play suddenly an exorbitant amount of snaps.
Yeah, and Gabe Hall's another guy who's here that was a high draft choice. Keep an eye on him as well.
I mentioned him on my podcast that he's a dark horse player that if you want to look at one of their future signings that has an opportunity to fight his way onto the 53, it's Gabe Hall. They gave him a decent amount of money when he signed as an undrafted free agent last summer. Going to stay at $295 this year. That's his playing weight, and he can play really any position on the defensive line. So seeing him all season long and talking about where he's grown and what he's worked on, he said going against Landon Dickerson teaches you all the lessons you need to know. And he mentioned that Landon won pretty much every single matchup. And he said, I learned some tough lessons.
Good stuff. Andrew DiCecco, let's go out to the edge where JoshSweat is another guy. A lot of people think that he will get a big deal and likely walk. Are there young edge guys here that didn't get a lot of playing time or got some playing time that can take on a bigger role?
Not really. This is an area that I think the Eagles are going to have to address in the draft, if not free agency, if they go for the big swing, because Bryce Huff, we'll have to see. Maybe another year learning Vic Fangio's defense, and maybe he's just a late bloomer, and all of a sudden he's able to flip the switch. But Nolan Smith and Jalen Hunt, I'll say this right now, I'm circling him as the one player that I'm expecting to take the largest leap forward in year two, because everything you saw, he was progressing at a tremendous rate, getting stronger, having a better sense for how to attack and exploit offensive tackles, and use his hands a lot better. He just was becoming more confident, more comfortable, and it was noticeable throughout the season. So, but beyond that, they don't really have anyone. They have KJ Henry, who they signed to a futures deal. He's a second-year player out of Clemson, and they have O'Shawn Mathis, who played in one game for the Eagles this year. These guys are more developmental or training camp. I don't want to say training camp bodies, but they're more long shot type of players. They're going to have to really bolster that group in the offseason.
All right, let's go to Baun in the event that he left. Dean obviously has the injury. Trotter drafted last year. What if Baun left with what's left over? How would that look?
Well, then that leaves you with an injured Nakobe Dean and Trotter Jr. and Van Sumeren. Van Sumeren's exclusive rights free agent, but that's not going to cost them much to keep. I believe that he's almost a lock to stay. But, I mean, you have to re-sign Oren Burks, I would think, because he's familiar with the defense. Probably not going to break the bank to bring him back. But, yeah, they don't have there's not a ton there. There's Dallas Gant, who was active for 2 games off the practice squad. He was a undrafted free agent signing last summer of the Vikings. The Eagles added him to the practice squad on November 4th, and he was able to kind of help them out there. But I mean, he's not. He's more of a developmental prospect. They need to add if they can't retain Bond, sign a free agent or draft one fairly high because that would severely deplete their depth.
Secondary, Slay, obviously, contract situation there. We had a lot of young guys in camp last year. Everybody was wondering and kind of excited about what that young battle would look like with a plethora of guys. They're now going into like their third year, a lot of these guys. So if Slay walked, do they have enough talent in-house, or would you rather see them maybe get a veteran player to replace Slay?
Well, if Slay walks, I think that lends itself to Isaiah. You almost have to re-sign Isaiah Rodgers. But I really do believe that you have Cooper DeJean, you have Quinyon Mitchell. Keely Ringo is still, people forget, he's younger than Quinyon Mitchell, but he's now entering his third season. He's an outside player. And depending on how the Eagles view Cooper DeJean, because I believe that he can play on the outside, and I'm sure the Eagles do as well, that would, let's say hypothetically, you have Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell who plays the nickel role. I still think you need to add another player there, even if Slay stays, because I think long-term Cooper DeJean's an outside corner. And so I think that they're going to add to that. That's a position group. You talk about edge rusher, corner, offensive line. Those are positions that the Eagles will invest in, and I do believe that they will, regardless of whether Slay is back for a final season or not.
All right, that's a look at some of the in-house options here quickly while we have Andrew DiCecco for Football at 4 here. They have pick 32. That's a spot where a lot of times you try to get out of that spot. But let's get your first initial thoughts on the 2025 draft class. Is this one that you're excited about? Is there, a lot of depth in this year's draft? Let's get your first thoughts, Andrew. I know a lot of people this time of the year want to hear your thoughts on the draft, so here we go. Draft season officially around the corner. What is your thoughts on this draft class?
Yeah, I like the depth on the defensive line, particularly at defensive tackle and edge rusher. Tight end is a lot deeper than it was in past years, and we'll get into more of that, but there's a player that could be floating around at 32. I know at this point in the year you hear a million different people say there's no way player X is going to be there at that time. You really have no idea. We're so early in the process that it's almost malpractice to declare that a certain player won't be somewhere. But Walter Nolan from Ole Miss is a defensive lineman that I think he gives you that Milton Williams-esque with more explosiveness. That would be, it could be in the mix there at 32. I also think they need to start thinking about, I think it's imperative actually that the Eagles draft a tight end this year, because you don't know what's going to happen with Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert is owed a lot of money, and I think he's only finished 7 games last year. So they're going to have to start thinking about life post Dallas Goedert and add to that group, because I think both Goddard and Grant Calcaterra are entering their final year of their deal.
Yeah, and by the way, Goddard missed some games this year, and the Eagles' offense, they just kept on plugging along without him. So we'll see. I agree with you on the tight end thing. Before we get out of here, a couple quick things. Let's get your take on which free agent that they have that you think they can least afford to let walk.
Zach Bond. Because of the lack
you and I agree there.
And because of how impactful he was in transforming that defense. I don't believe he was a one-year wonder. I think the best is still yet to come because he hasn't played a ton of defense in his career. And another year working with Vic Fangio and linebackers coach Bobby King, I just think that would be invaluable. I think that's a must sign.
Last one earlier today, Adam Schefter put out there that Cam Jurgens underwent back surgery to alleviate nerve pain. Now we know why he was unable to play or start the NFC Championship game. He did finish that game when Landon Dickerson went out. He did play in the Super Bowl, but now back surgery. They do expect a full recovery. But I guess when you get back surgery, you got to start watching that. So when we were talking about younger players, they don't really have a young option behind Jurgens to play center, do they not?
No, they don't. So I think you need to get younger there anyway, because really Landon Dickerson was their backup center. He would slide over. Nick Gates was always inactive, and now he's been since released since the parade. So I think they need to add a young player there anyway, and I think this even heightens that importance because I do believe that Cam Jurgens is going to be in line for a contract extension, of course, but they still need to have a viable option as a reserve center and not have to rely on sliding Landon Dickerson over mid-game.
All right, Andrew, it's a busy time. Obviously, free agency is going to be key for this team. Will they retain? Will they bring in some new faces? They've already brought in a new offensive coordinator. Free agency begins on March the 10th. And, of course, the NFL draft will have that covered for you. You can check out Andrew over at InsideTheBirds.com and right here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.